Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast explores the transition to net zero and the systems driving real change in how we move, live and power our world. Every week I sit down with the people leading that change, those offering insight, innovation and impact in many ways people don't fully see until they hear their stories. If you're ready for real conversations that inspire action and drive change, please like this video, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey, and let's cut through the noise and build a better future together. So on today's episode I have with me Ben Marks, and he's the Managing Director at Electrify Research, and we've been speaking a little while, haven't we, Ben? So finally managed to get this podcast together. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be here, and really pleased to be to finally do it. Yeah.
So Electrify Research is your most recent business, isn't it? But let's kind of dig down into a little bit of why you started it and what you did before to sort of build on it, and what the company is anyway.
Right. Okay. I'll go very, very briefly deep into my past, and sort of try and fast forward to today quite quickly.
Okay.
So my background, the first part of my career was in sales. I didn't enjoy it. I went off and did an MBA, and as many people use an MBA, it's kind of a way to pivot a career. And after a number of years, after my MBA, I ended up in the market research sector in about 1999. And fast forward a few years to 2004, I set up a research agency called YouthSight, and I ended up running that for 18 years.
Wow.
It kind of felt like a lifetime, but I loved it, and it was my baby. I founded it, ran it, and owned it, and we were a specialist youth research agency, about 30 people, and we had an access panel, which is a kind of thing in market research industry where you get people who want to take part in surveys to agree to it, and you have a sort of incentivized mechanism, so you pay them cash for doing surveys. So we had the biggest youth panel in the UK, 150,000 young people.
Wow.
And we built up a sort of a range of tracker surveys, which were primarily for the higher education sector.
Okay.
So there was 4 of them, and we ended up working with almost every university in the country. The idea was to create a kind of consumer insight currency for the higher education sector, because universities are involved in lots of things in relation to students, their attraction, recruitment, satisfaction, retention, and alumni. So there's a kind of a whole life cycle, and we created tracker surveys to allow universities to get deep insights into each of those stages, compare their performance against competitors, that sort of thing. And so we built that, and sort of to finish my background, or the first part of it, I eventually sold that business to a market research agency called Savanta, who you'll sometimes see for doing election results and stuff like that.
Okay.
Or election polling. And I worked there for a year, and I left that business, and then the next question was, what now? That's in 2022.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's and then you set up Electrify kind of on the back of leaving YouthSight / Savanta then. Yeah,
exactly that. So, I had a bit of time off, a year, which was quite nice, and then I was sort of on borderline whether I was going to become a teacher or whether I was going to have another crack at market research.
That's a bit different there, Ben.
They're
really.
very different. Yeah,
Agreed.
but I know. It was kind of something different, or something that I know, and I guess it's the confluence of a few different things. But I'd been listening to podcasts around the energy transition for a long time. Things like the Energy Gang and cleaning up with Michael Liebreich and so many, Bloomberg NEF and I don't know, scores of them. And I become very interested, started reading books around the transition, and in particular electrification, which I see as the most important route to, or the fastest and most realistic route to wide-scale decarbonisation.
Yes.
So, I felt I wanted to do something in that space. The other idea was teaching, which I think is good works and has always interested me. But ultimately, I decided to go for the market research because it's a territory I know how to set up tracker studies. I'm very passionate about the idea of decarbonisation, and domestic is a large proportion of total carbon emissions. And I know kind of how to do consumer research. And then finally, the final piece of the motivation was I did my own survey of what's out there in terms of consumer focused insights. And I think the answer was very little. So organisations could do their own research, commission research, but it's in a sector that certainly 2 years ago, but still now, it's dominated by engineers, technologists, policy people, but not many marketing heads. So my feeling is, my contention and the motto of the business is that it's it's consumers who will decide the pace of electrification. And so without insight into what they're thinking and who we should be targeting, the transition will not go at the pace it needs to go at, and we all know that is a lot faster, right?
Because I was talking to Kirsty Pendleton recently from the AA, and we were kind of talking about the misinformation. I always talk about this in the podcast, and she was talking specifically about the percentage of their members who wouldn't even, like, now that they're totally hostile to moving to electric vehicle, for a start off. But I know yours isn't just EVs, is it? Yours is kind of the energy and electric vehicles. But that was quite interesting to sort of hear that insight from Kirsty, from that point of view. So yeah, I think it's a really, really important thing. So I'm assuming you're kind of putting together access panels again, and you've got participants who are on these panels. What are you specifically asking them? What are the kind of questions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, on misinformation and myths, we measure those, and you're right. They are significant and enduring. So they're not changing much over 2 years.
Oh, God.
That's an important trend. However, you didn't ask me that.
No, that's important. That's important.
Yeah, no, we can talk about that.
If they're not, then yeah.
Yeah, no, they're not, there's not a huge amount of movement, but I've always been rather shocked at the extent. But I don't think that's the whole story around misinformation. We can talk about it later. But in terms of who we're talking to, every quarter we talk to 4,000 homeowners. They're not Electrify's panel. We go out into the industry and go to panel owners, like my company used to be at YouthSite. We go to panel owners, and we essentially we in return for they bill us for essentially the cash incentives and the access to their respondents, and they have millions of respondents. So we set up quotas so that the sample that we get back in to our questions, the people who respond to our questions, are representative of the different groups that we're including, and we're including homeowners in the UK, France, Germany and the US. So we've got a comparative for the results. We talked to 4,000 a quarter, which is 16,000 a year, 1,000 in each territory. And so far we've been going for 2 years, so we've got 32,000 interviews in the can.
Wow.
And that essentially acts as a database which you can look at longitudinally, so look at the trends, or you can look at as a snapshot and sort of interrogate the data in quite a deep way as well, using the tools on the dashboard. So it's really like we've got the views, every view is there. You're able to sort of sculpt the sample that you're looking at so that you can understand every subgroup, every group, every every facet of the data.
Okay, so you've got your homeowners.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people. You've got 32,000 responses so far.
Yeah.
What are the questions that you're asking them? So are you asking people who are thinking about electrifying, or they're not, or so what are you actually asking them?
Yeah, so good question. Talking about questions. We are talking to homeowners, and the questionnaire essentially looks at 4 technologies: solar, battery, EV, and heat pump. And they're the target technologies, but we're talking to them about their setup. So we're talking to them about cars, roofs, and heating systems, essentially. And we ask them what have they got, and then what might they consider when it comes time to a change. And then so that's kind of then we ask them a lot about their attitude to the climate, and then we ask kind of some hypothetical questions, which for the considerers of each of our target technologies, we ask them what do they see as the benefits and drawbacks, what are the drivers and barriers to change, but we ask the same of people who reject the technologies. So essentially what we're doing is picking up what they call a path to purchase. So that kind of consumer journey: what have you got, what might you consider, what are your attitudes, and how a future might look for you. It's always difficult to predict the future, but at least we can pick up what's the considerations that people are bringing to a purchase decision.
So you've got solar, battery, EVs, and heat pumps.
Yeah.
They're all quite different, but they're all different technologies.
Yeah.
Is the thinking for all of these technologies the same when you're getting these answers, or this is just generally, I suppose I'm asking, or do you find, because I mean there was a whole thing about heat pumps a couple of years ago, wasn't there, or a few years ago, about the negativity of that was out there, and we know where it was coming from now, because it was being promoted by certain people in certain areas. Are people changing their decisions about some of this technology since you've started this research, or is it still the same? We're not going to do any of this because.
Yeah. Change has been less speedy than I'd expected in most of the areas. There's kind of so we look at consideration. That's an important sort of metric. And consideration, so would you consider getting? A consideration for EVs is, in the UK, is going up slightly, quarter on quarter. And consideration for heat pumps was going up for the first year, so we're now in the end of year 2, but has been static in the UK for the second year, and it didn't go up much. So it went up, but it's been fairly static. So yeah, and in the other territories, France, Germany, US, actually fairly static too, but that's only part of the picture, the trends, because there's a lot of movement within that body of people. And there's a lot that you can do with the demand that exists. So you don't have to always worry about net demand. You can think, are we targeting the people who do have strong demand effectively? And in a way, that's what the beauty of the product is. It lets you identify the groups who, what they call the the lowest
hanging.
hanging. Yeah. So are you converting them efficiently? Because you're not, sometimes you're pushing at an open door. So we need to identify that. And again, going back slightly, rewinding slightly, you asked before that you made the point before that these are diverse technologies, kind of arguably with nothing to do with each other. You can't substitute a car for a heating system.
Not going to drive my heat pump around.
Exactly. But on the other hand, they've got something in common, which is the same fuel. When you have a gas boiler and a petrol car, you can't swap, your gas for your petrol, or vice versa. If you've got a bit too much petrol in the tank, but you're low on, 10p coins for your meter.
Yeah.
You can't do that. But when you get a common fuel, special things start to happen, which is, the S curve around home electrification, or at least in theory, that's what it is. So you get solar panels and you say, well, actually, I can charge my car for free. So suddenly an EV becomes attractive.
Yes.
You have vehicle to home facility in your EV, and all of a sudden you think, well, we don't use the car that much. How about we ran the heating off the car battery from time to time? And then you see the new sort of range of demand responsive tariffs. Fixed tariffs with time of use or variable time of use. And you think, well, actually, I could do with paying 7p for my electricity rather than whatever, 25, 30p, whatever it is. Things start to fall into place, and we can show that with our data. So these are network effects, and we can show that with our data. So if you've got solar, for example, rooftop solar, you might want, a small number of people might want, if you don't have rooftop solar, a small number of people might want a heat pump and an EV. If you do have solar, we can measure how much that uplifts by, and it's huge. It's like doublings. And we can do that for all the different technologies, creating a matrix of ownership of one product and how it impacts the potential demand for other products. Also, we can look at co-ownership, where if you've got one product, what's the likelihood that you've got another product?
I suppose, with us, we kind of went for a few at once, because actually we found an installer that could provide solar and a battery and we had a charger as well, so and then we got an EV afterwards, and then pardon, we've got a heat pump as well.
How?
So we're well, I'm not saying we're totally carbon neutral because I order from Amazon and I need to stop that, but hey, but actually we're fossil fuel free in the house. So you're right, there is that kind of moving through the technologies, and once you kind of embrace these things, it makes sense. I mean, in a way, we had no choice. Well, sorry, we decided we wanted a heat pump at some point, but we never expected our boiler to die when it did. Right. So that kind of that happened last year. So we had the heat pump put in last October. So yeah, it is that. I suppose it's getting people to think, oh, well, when something goes wrong, you can get something that's more for it's not. It doesn't have to be full of fossil fuel. You don't have to just get another boiler. You don't have to get another fossil fuel filled vehicle,
Yeah.
you've got these different choices, haven't you?
You do. You're a brilliant case. Are you finding it okay? Are you finding sort of the cross benefits and
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things, Ben, that we wished we'd done slightly different. Like we wish we'd got a bigger battery, but then at some point, like you're saying about vehicle to home, at some point, hopefully we'll change EV, and maybe at that point in time, we might be able to use the car as a battery. And after I said to you before we started recording, I had an operation on my Achilles kind of like 4 weeks ago, and the car's not really been out. I'm the main driver because my husband will get the bus and what have you. So that car's been sat there, and it could have been 38.5 kilowatts worth of power coming into the house.
yeah,
So people don't always recognise that. We've had a few teething problems with the heat pump, but it seems to have settled down now. But it's like anything, isn't it? You go through these transitions, and it's kind of right, suck it and see. But luckily, kind of the heat pump company helped us, and we got where we need to be now. So yeah.
yeah.
But we have all of the package now.
Well, you're ahead of me. I've just got I was at a PHEV, and now, as of the last week, got an EV. Which I'm
Brilliant.
Well, I'm happy with the EV. The tech in it is more complicated. But on heat pump satisfaction, which you were saying about for yourself, we find that it's actually the form of heating with the highest level of satisfaction. And I think that, yeah, you do get teething problems sometimes, but once they settle down, it often has a higher quality of heat with more stable temperatures.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for them. And, looking at the 4 countries that we cover, it's the highest level of satisfaction compared to gas boiler, solid fuel, storage heaters. So yeah, I hope it will be a positive future for you. In terms of something else you mentioned, which was about distressed purchasers, that's kind of slightly bad news, because we ask people under what circumstances might you change your heating system. Now, for heat pumps, it's much better if it's a planned purchase or a summer purchase, which isn't typically when boilers break.
No, it's not, full enough.
They tend to break at the worst possible moment, and you then want a drop-in solution, which is the gas boiler. And 66% of people in the UK, of homeowners in the UK, say that they will change their heating system when their system breaks down and can't be repaired. So you've only got a market of a third of people who will even consider a planned purchase. So it immediately narrows down. And then of those, most won't even consider a heat pump. So the sort of universe of people gets smaller and smaller quite quickly. That's the bad news. The good news is that we're at such low penetration rates and new install rates, probably about 10% on new installs, which includes quite a lot more than that on new builds. But on heating system installs, including retrofits, it might be 10%, but you're looking at maybe 2.5% total penetration for heat pumps in the UK. So we've got a lot of upside, and we've got much more potential demand than is actually going in. So there's quite a lot of goodwill there. You just have to be able to identify it, which is kind of the central point of HETS, which is the study we run called Homeowner Electrification Tracker Study. So there is quite a lot of demand, and I don't know if this is too long an answer.
No, don't be.
Can I yak on?
Go on.
Yeah. So one of the things that we do with HETS is we look at people's attitude to the climate. We look at people's attitude to climate. I need to put my teeth in. And the belief in myths around heat pumps and EVs, and attitudes to renewables, just broadly. And then we do a kind of a cluster analysis where we find groups that have got a lot in common, quite cohesive, but quite different from each other.
Okay.
And they are segments. That's a classic market research segmentation. When you overlay the segments onto things like demand for heat pumps or interest in EVs as the next car, you start to see something quite magical, which is that there are typically, of our 8 segments, there are 2 who are massively more likely to buy. And they're the people who, heat pump manufacturers, charge point operators, slash EV manufacturers, policymakers, banks should be targeting. To go out with a generic marketing message is, in my view, crackers.
Yeah.
That undermines the whole
Target.
principle of marketing, which is, in my MBA, they said, my marketing professor said, marketing is all about choosing your customers. And heat pump manufacturers should be choosing very, very carefully, because their customers are in a small group and they need to be able to identify them. And actually, it's not that far different, even though it's a more mature market. With it's not that different with cars, EVs. Slightly different with solar. Interesting.
Okay.
But in terms of the segmentation, but yeah. So having consumer data allows you to zero in on our top 2 segments. They're called Electrification Trailblazers and Pragmatic Adopters. And you can identify them both by their demographics, their age, gender, income, education level. You can identify them that way by their attitude, so the sorts of messages which would excite them. And you can see what that impact is in terms of their consideration, and whether or not they think, if they are considering a heat pump or an EV, whether they think they're going to follow through and actually purchase, which is another question that we ask. Because self-reporting on purchase intention is actually quite a good way to predict sales. So would you consider an EV? Liz, how likely do you think you are actually to get an EV? Because there's lots of people who'd consider one.
But they wouldn't necessarily go and get one. Yeah.
When you get it, and a lot of them say, well,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. Actually, and I'm just going to go back a step as well, because you talked about charge point operators, but we're talking about home charging, not public charging, aren't we? So this is all to do with the home rather than any kind of public charging. So I just wanted to kind of just confirm that one, that it's your home charging products, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to homeowners, and in our sample, UK, I think, can't remember, maybe about 2/3 to 3/4 of the homeowners have access to off-street parking. So that's that has a huge impact on likelihood to purchase an EV. So it's of less interest to public charging, because obviously if you've got a home charger, that's what you'll use most.
And that's the study that you do. That's the kind of research that you're doing anyway. It's not out in a public car park and charging there, is it? It's that kind of ecosystem in your home.
Yeah. So we're talking to homeowners.
Yeah.
And they're over 18. They take part in major purchase decisions, and we talk to a sample that is representative of each country.
Yeah.
So you're a standard homeowner.
So okay, so you're collecting all of these insights.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just kind of delve a little bit into who these insights, who is your target market for this?
Yeah.
Because it's a subscription service, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, exactly.
So it's a subscription service. And can you just explain a little bit about the actual target markets that you're working with?
Yeah, exactly. So the sorts of it's for businesses, so it's not for consumers, and it's to help them market better by giving them consumer data. So the sorts of organisations who are going to be most interested would be banks. In particular, banks with sustainability teams or interest in sustainability. Sometimes it's in a team, a silo, and sometimes it sits across the products. But either way, if they're looking to increase their green loan book, then we can help. Energy providers is another big one. Obviously, they've got a lot of tariffs, and they've got installation businesses. Government and policymakers, they need data on what homeowners want and believe. Home charge point, home charging. Trade associations and media. So those are the sorts of clients who have or I'll be targeting for the product. Yeah.
Because I was when you said banks, it took me a minute to actually work out. But now you're saying about kind of the green loans and things like that. That makes total sense, And like you say, if you're wanting to kind of narrow down that marketing message and making sure that you are targeting the right people who are looking, it's about giving them the right stories and the right storytelling and stories and the messaging, isn't it, to bring them from somebody who's considering it to a purchaser.
Exactly. Yeah. So two of our segments are, we've got Electrification Trailblazers and Pragmatic Adopters. These are the key ones. It goes all the way down through kind of pro-green but not enough money and things like that. And through to the final group, which is the denying rejectors, who have got low propensity on everything and really buy into those myths. But the first two segments are absolutely critical, and to be able to sort of nail them down means that if you've got a social media strategy, and obviously a lot of spend nowadays goes through search-based advertising, AdWords or Instagram or everything online. You've got these levers that you can pull. You can target by age and gender and interests, and you can determine the advertising that you're putting out, the messaging, and even the product in terms of the things that are going to chime with each of the segments. So it allows you to give a surgically defined message to a particular audience, which should mean that you get much more bang for your marketing buck, rather than spending whether it's £1,000 or £1 million on a campaign. You get more bang for the money, and it might not be a campaign. It might be a government initiative to target certain people, or so there's a wide range of reasons why you want to find the right people.
I mean, this is, when it comes down to it, this is, and we talk about this quite a bit as well, but this is about bringing everybody on the journey and equity, isn't it? So I hope I was actually going to ask you about kind of the government side of things, because I suppose if you've got these insights that you have more of than a government would, then you can identify those people who are moving towards these technologies and those who just aren't, and maybe even identifying the reasons why they aren't heading in the direction for wanting to change to those technologies. And then hopefully even a government has to market, don't they, as in you're targeting areas to make sure that it is a quick, we have got equity, if I can get my teeth in, because we want everybody to come on this journey.
Yeah, we do. it's my view that realistically, in the short term, not everybody will be able to come on this
No, I
journey.
know.
And but the process has to go as quickly as possible, if only to allow the OEMs, the installer community, to gear up with early innovators or earlier adopters rather, so that they've got the capacity to deal with the mainstream when it comes. And that's on all the different products. You know, we've only got 10% seemingly solar penetration, is that right? But there's a huge proportion of people who are interested. Actually, a point I was going to make before about the why solar's different is there's almost no resistance to it by segment. So it's the only problem with solar, or the benefit and the problem with solar, is financial. So it's the fear of high upfront costs, but it's also the benefit of money off your electricity bill.
Yeah.
Uh, that's the big story with solar. But there are some important factors around solar, which would include income doesn't make a difference in ambition, but it makes a big difference in time scale. So lots of people think, I want solar, but I'll get it sometime in the next X years. Certain people think, I want solar, and they're thinking this year or next year. And an income is quite a powerful predictor of that. So solar is different from the other technologies. It's much less contentious.
Yeah, because I suppose, and the other thing I would say, because like my in-laws over in St Albans, they got rooftop solar when there was the buy-in tariff,
Yeah.
and they've got a whole roof full of solar panels.
Nice.
But we worked out, and I think this is right. We've got 9 solar panels, so we've got 6, and we've got a really weird roof. But we've got kind of 6, and then it dips down, and we've got a 2 and a 1, so we've got 9 in total. And for those 9, we've got the same amount of power, or pull, that my in-laws have, and I can't remember how many panels they are. But because of the ability for the panels to kind of draw more energy, and and all of the other stuff, it's kind of what I'm saying is things change so much, don't they? The panels I think our panels are quite a bit bigger, so that's probably why my husband would know all this and kind of go, she's saying she doesn't know what she's about, but so I know that we can kind of get more out of them. We don't get, it's the feed-in tariff, not the buy-in tariff, isn't it?
Yeah.
We don't get that, obviously, because we've only had ours a couple of years now. But it is that kind of the fact that technology changes, things get cheaper. Hopefully over time, I mean, look at how we can buy. Well, not necessarily buy a mobile phone. My mobile phone I got last year, and it's on a contract. So look at all the ways that we can kind of do all of this stuff, and actually we've got to, in order to bring people along this journey, we've got to be heading towards making it more affordable for everybody, haven't we? I mean, even with the with the kind of the money that you get from the grant for the heat pump, the other end, it's still a lot of money. Do you know what I mean? And not everybody's got that. And we were lucky, we kind of there were things we had to kind of fiddle around with things, but we managed to afford it. So, but not everybody's got that kind of ability, have they? We've got to bring more people on it.
Yeah, I think that according to Ambient's data, which I look at their report, I think the average install is kind of like 13,000, something like that, 12, 13. And the bus grant is what, 7.5?
That's it, the bus grant.
It's a big, so it's a big gap to fill, especially if your home needs, a bit more insulation or whatever. And it's not without it's not without difficulties or problems, but you need, as like I said before, you need to pump prime the market in order for it to go mainstream. The kind of the thing that I always remember, cling to sometimes, is that hydrocarbons are as cheap as they'll ever be, broadly speaking. Obviously, you get changes in demand, changes in price, but in terms of extraction, they're never going to get much better than they are now. But with electrification technologies, because it's modular and because there's so much R&D going in, they will get lots cheaper, much cheaper. And that's every technology. We can see it right now with batteries. They're advancing at an incredible speed. The chemistries are getting less obnoxious or benign. The heat pumps are actually getting more efficient, and I think once they've more than helping people with the installation, what they need to do, and I think everybody knows this and agrees, they need to reform the way that the price is formulated for electricity because of the spark gap.
Decoupling.
Yeah, exactly. So when that happens, and I'm hopeful, well, this is way beyond my pay grade, but hopefully that will happen at some point.
I hope so too. I know Greg Jackson of Octopus Energy is pushing for decoupling of gas and electricity. I know he is. Yeah,
and he's I think he's probably a hero of everybody who's in this space. He's absolutely brilliant. But so obviously decoupling, changing the economics will change everything around heat, and I guess that's dependent to a certain extent on overbuilding wind and solar or increasing the rollout of those technologies so that gas becomes the intermittent supplier. But that's all kind of grid stuff, supply side, which isn't really my world. My world is demand side. And the exam question at the moment is, how are we going to accelerate electrification in homes right now? Because we were supposed to be halving carbon emissions by the end of this decade, and we are at best globally at the top of the plateau. So we've got a long way to go, and there's a lot of people out there who are kind of throwing their hands up in the air and saying, well, we can't do anything about this, and we're just a relatively small emitter in the global scheme of things. But everyone takes that attitude. We're all going, it's a problem for everybody, especially our children.
It is.
So we have to do something, in my view, and everyone in this space, and probably everyone listening to this podcast, they get that, and there's so many brilliant people working to that end. If we work together and we do it smart, my contribution is, I guess, insight on demand at this troubled period. Eventually it will be straightforward and everyone will want to electrify their homes. But for this next period, which might be 10 years, might be a bit more, we need to be surgical about it. And I'm not sure that kind of generic messaging, even if you want equity, I'm not sure if it's achievable right now because the prices of the products just aren't quite there.
It's either that. The only other option is to kind of have more government involvement, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. At the moment, we'll have to see. But going back to what you said about everybody in this sector, what I'd love to see is everybody out there wanting to do something rather than nothing. Exactly. Because if we all do something a little bit, it's kind of it makes a big difference. It's kind of like I talk about incremental change and continuous improvement. All of those little changes make a big difference. You might think what you're doing is, well, I'm only doing a little bit. Just do something and keep doing that something, or keep adding on to that something, because doing something, again, like you say, is better than doing nothing.
Exactly. And it's that's at the personal level, but at the organisational level as well. Exactly the same story. So, for example, total cost of ownership on an EV is very often, in fact, I think probably getting to the point of normally cheaper than on a ICE car, but the upfront cost is higher. So, innovative packaging around leases and purchase or whatever is very, very important in the picture. Changing public charging costs, and that's probably a function of demand and how widespread they are. But we're in the foothills of this. But different types of organisation like banks, charge point operators, and energy providers have all got their part to play. You know, Octopus Go or the better ones than that, Octopus and Go Intelligent or whatever it's called. Those all make a huge difference. So everybody's playing a part. Innovative financing, good tariffs, the right sort of advertising, the right sort of targeting, which I can help with. They're all playing a part. And on heat, it's more challenging than EV, but there's a positive story to say. Installations are going up really fast. It's just not where the government's ambition was, that's all. But we'll get there. But the start point of getting there is targeting. I mean, to give a number, we look at the top 3 out. It's actually, I don't know how I didn't know it was 6. It's 6 segments. The top 3 out of the 6 segments, not 8. The top 3 out of the 6 in our estimation will account for 97% of heat pump sales.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so if you're targeting right now, you can believe in equity and everybody needs to be on this journey, but it's probably not realistic for half the market to be on this journey right now. So the message, my kind of, the hymn sheet I sing from is, we need to be targeting the three, and really 2 segments who are going to buy.
And take them from that, and I know I said it before, but that kind of lack of understanding, because a lot of the time, like you're saying there are lots of people interested, but I mean, if I go right back to the reason why I started this podcast in the first place was because I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue about any of this stuff. Do you know what I mean? And both me and my husband wanted to learn, and I wanted to learn about all the different areas and aspects of electrification. And that's why I invited people like yourself to come on and talk about this, because I just thought, well, if it's not, if I think like that, then it's probably not just me, and I want to share this when people are kind of providing these insights and all of this knowledge, that let's get it out there, let's share it. And yeah, we get sort of people being rude on YouTube to kind of, if they're not up for it, then that's up to them,
Why watch it if you don't?
Well, it's those algorithms, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, you're more likely to get, I don't know why people don't realise that you're more likely to get stuff that you don't like coming into your feed if you kind of put, you get messages about this, that and the other, and they're just kind of, oh my God, sometimes some of the messages we get, I just have to ignore them. We even have a TikTok channel, or we have a TikTok account, and one guy posted 99 messages, and I just said, oh God, come on. So I ended up, had to block, I'm afraid. But it's, that I'm not saying all of these people who are negative will change their minds at the moment. We just need to get those, like I say, with the lack of understanding and lack of clarity, because of the fact that they've had all of this negative messaging thrown at them, and people do just believe it, because how do you know what the truth is if lots of people are saying things that that actually isn't true? How do you know? How do you get to the bottom of what the actual truth is?
Yeah, well, two things. First of all, your podcast is brilliant. I love it because because of what you said, the diversity, and like I can learn about. I was just fascinated by the episode on powering up Arctic lorries or whatever they, trucks.
Yeah, with Amy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was astonishing. These huge vehicles are now going electric. So, and how it works and how the electricity is brought to the different locations. So it's a brilliant podcast, and exactly what you said, bringing all these different pieces of the puzzle together starts to create a holistic picture which people kind of get the hang of. You're doing it in a lot of detail. But you talked about myths, and we all know which newspapers come up with new myths every day, and they propagate these things, and people on LinkedIn who are specialists in it. But there's lots of people, this is my view, lots of people buy the myths, but they're not catastrophic, because people can hold two truths in their mind at once. And it can be that they think that the batteries on EVs are very damaging, but they can also accept that they're less damaging than the petrol alternative. They might make that. So as I say, there's lots of. I think we tested 5 myths on EVs. Really high buy-in to all of them, but it doesn't necessarily. Even EV owners buy into a lot of them, but it didn't stop them. They just perhaps think that they're not as bad as the petrol alternative. So even if they're not true at all, like EVs destroy the roads, or they throw up microplastics in different proportions to ICE cars, or the batteries are so polluting that it's difficult to decide what's better, ICE or. But as I say, people can hold two truths at the same time.
I know.
Well, actually, sorry, they're not two truths, are they? They can hold conflicting ideas at the same time.
Exactly. And actually, there's a conversation I had. Oh God, I had a conversation with somebody I used to work with quite a few years ago recently, and the battery situation came because both myself and another chap who I used to work with has got the same vehicle. It's got the same EV as us, and I just mentioned it, and this chap I was talking to, basically was saying, well, about battery minerals and batteries and stuff. But it was one of those conversations I really wasn't expecting. He's another improvement person as well, so I was a bit gutted. And actually that sort of, it threw me, and afterwards I just thought, why did I not mention laptops and mobiles? Because I do agree. I did say to him, I do agree, because of the fact that, we are kind of digging up loads of rare earth minerals anyway, aren't we? That's the whole point of calling them rare. But I do get what he's saying, but some of the things that he was saying weren't quite right. So, but you've got to pick your fights, haven't you? You've got to pick your arguments, and I think that's really important. And if it's totally untrue, I wouldn't have flinched, actually saying what the truth was. But when it comes to kind of that level of, right, he's got his thoughts on this, and I basically said the reason why we went for all of this in our house is because my husband's a climate scientist, which he knows, and also the fact that we wanted to stop using fossil fuels. That's it. If it literally, I wasn't going to argue with him at all anymore, and I just said, that's the reason why. We'll have to just agree to disagree, because I have my thoughts this way, but I do agree with certain parts of what he was saying. But again, like I say, it's about picking those arguments, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, most of my friends don't know, hold lots of misinformation in their minds, and they kind of give it to me, challenge me. I'm not sure they're always interested in the answer because I yak and yak and yak. I'm fascinated by the whole thing, by the whole, sustainability, decarbonisation, all the different technologies. I love it. So I kind of go on a bit too much sometimes. And you're right, you've got to pick your battles. In a way, the basic message, which is that I want to leave the world, I don't want to have a terrible impact on the climate, and this is better than that.
Yeah.
A lot of people just get it, and they don't have to fight it, and it's actually huge amounts of confusion that certain newspapers, he keeps saying, certain newspapers come up with these messages. It just confuses. I think people know the truth, which is that burning fossils is not a great idea for the climate. Yeah.
It just takes a while to come through. So, what would you? A final question.
Yeah.
If you could leave people listening and watching with one message that you wanted to finish with, what would that message be? Whether it's about your work, whether it's about what their marketing messages need to change to that kind, anything, you tell me.
Well, I suppose it's what I said at the beginning, is if you get the idea that it's consumers who are going to be driving the decarbonisation of homes, if you get that, if you buy that, then you should use high quality consumer data to drive your decisions. And to not do so, it seems, I don't know, you're missing out on a trick, and you might be wasting money. And that's really what it's all about, because we all work within budgets, so it's kind of in a way it's saving money, making things more targeted. I think that's the core message. There is a little supplementary, which is systems thinking, because we are, or we will soon will be, at this point where we can't just, if we're selling heat pumps, we can't just be considering heat pumps. If you're selling EVs, you can't just be considering cars, because we're creating an ecosystem, electrification ecosystem. And so if you're interested in systems thinking as well, what your product and how it sort of has repercussions on other products and vice versa, then again, subscribing to HETS is quite useful, because we speak to that.
Well, it's been really, really interesting talking to you. I love all of these conversations I have with people. It's just so enlightening and so interesting, and I really, really appreciate your time, Ben. It's lovely. So I will share your kind of all of your links and things like that in the show notes. They will be in there, and if there's anything specific you want me to add, then please let me know, and we'll talk about it separately. But just to say thank you. It's been absolutely, really, really insightful, and I hope everybody's got something out of this. I'm sure they would do. So I'm going to finish and say to everybody, as I do every week, please like, subscribe, share all of our posts, and let people know about this. And we're on LinkedIn. The Electric Evolution podcast has got its own little page. Just follow us on there. And to everybody watching and listening, I'm going to say thank you to Ben, and thanks to all of you. Bye. Thanks for watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're a charge point operator, local authority or stakeholder in EV charging, I'd love to talk to you about our Charge Point Evolution framework. It's designed to help you create a seamless EV driver journey, boost utilisation and maximise your return on investment. Alternatively, if you know someone who'd be a great podcast guest or might be interested in sponsoring an episode, you can email me on liz@fullcircleci.co.uk. Thanks again for watching.